My name is Bradley, and I'm an adrenaline junkie. One of my main sources of adrenaline comes from going out into the woods and seeing if any skinwalkers or Bigfoot, or something that will catch interest in me. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right into my skinwalker encounter. The date is August 9th, and I recently began dating this girl that I met online. She and I instantly clicked when we found out both of us believed in things like skinwalkers and Bigfoot. So, eventually, we got comfortable enough to meet in person, and she suggested I come out to her property in Alabama and walk around the woods. Me being me, I instantly agreed to do that. She lives on the very outskirts of a city called Grant, right near the Cathedral Caverns. So, her property was located on the same mountain as the Cathedral Caverns. She had about a 4-acre property up there, so it was fun to explore it. We head out at about 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning with our flashlights and knives in hand. We're out there for about 30 minutes when it began to rain a little bit, so we turned around and headed back to her house. On the way back, she keeps looking behind us. I notice this and ask her if she thinks we're being followed. She says yes, and I reply with the same way. Let's just go back to the house. About 20 minutes go by, and we're back in the clearing of her yard. I take about 15 steps into the clearing, and just freeze on the spot and turned around. Right on the edge of the tree line, less than 40 feet away, I see an animal's skull hovering about 8.5 feet off the ground, with solid glowing, what appeared to be white eyes. If I had to guess, it looked like a bull skull. She turns and sees me standing there, staring at this 8.5 foot tall being, and runs over and grabs me by the arm and pulls me up onto the porch. When we got to the porch, this thing was gone. A couple of hours go by, and I'm out in my car vaping by myself. She had already gone to sleep, and I was still trying to comprehend what exactly I had seen. It was at that moment that I felt something push up against the rear of my car. Not like it hit it, but kind of like how a cat will push up against somebody. I look through my driver's side rear view and can see the same animal sticking out from behind my car. I did my best to stay as quiet as I could to not alarm it of my presence. Then, somehow, it locked eyes with me through the rearview mirror, and it was like it got a hold of my mind and was trying to make me get out of my car and walk off into the wilderness. I got as far as popping the door handle to unlatch the door before I appeared to snap out of it and close the door, locking it. I closed my eyes and pretended it wasn't there. So about 5.5 minutes go by and I opened my eyes again, and it was gone. I couldn't see it anywhere, so I opened my door and sprinted inside and stayed in there until the sun came up. I didn't even sleep. The sunrise began to roll up over the horizon, and I was walking out to my car to leave. My girlfriend gave me a hug and kiss and told me to be safe. I'm glad I didn't tell her then that the whole time we were standing next to my car with it facing the woods. I could still see it. To this day, I know I'll eventually tell her, and she has no idea that the thing has been watching my every move with extreme attention to detail. I know this story might sound fake, but I'm telling you what happened to me, and that I believe this thing is stalking me. That's why I have to keep making up excuses why I don't go back to Alabama. Okay, so a bit of a backstory. I live in Colorado, and I'm a very outdoorsy type of person. My friend and I both have horses that we keep at a local ranch, and it backs up to hundreds of miles of forest, cottonwood trees, most of them at least 50 feet in height, and it's eerie as hell back there. So anyway, this one night there was a storm, and we got stuck waiting for the hail to pass under some thick brush. Woohoo for Colorado weather, right? But by the time it had passed, the sun was setting, and we were still 4 hours from the ranch. We wanted to try and get back as fast as possible, and it got dark extremely quickly. In fact, it was so dark that you couldn't see 6 feet in front of you. We ended up having to use our phones as flashlights that even barely lit up the ground. Familiar forest became completely alien, and we ended up taking the wrong trail back. It led us to this abandoned building, mostly fallen in and of itself, and outside of it, we found heaps of deer bones, mostly ribs, but a few skulls too. They were white as snow, like you could almost see them perfectly without the flashlights. It was creepy enough, so we started leaving when we started to hear something in the bushes around us. Now, we're no stranger to bears and mountain lion, but this sounded much different. It was a lot lighter. It moved with a creepy grace, almost like a deer, I guess. So we kept going, and the thing kept following us. Our horses were both spooking and acting irrational, very out of character for her Mustang and my quarter horse, who, by the way, are both trusty horses. We do trails all the time, and even sometimes at night, though we'd never been this deep or this lost in the woods, ever. That's when this horrible, horrible smell hit us. I can only explain it as a body of burning flesh. It was disgusting. I almost gagged. I thought a serial killer or something was about to jump us. At this point, we had both pulled our shirts over our faces and were trying to get out of there ASAP, though the thick underfoot made it difficult for the horses to walk safely. So, we decided that the best option was to dismount them. Now, walking on the ground, my friend was in front of me, but I heard from her from behind calling me, from the direction of the abandoned building, which was still not far from us, probably about 50 feet. Something hit my horse. She reared up and almost got loose, but I held on to her head. About 5 minutes later, the smell came back, and the weirdest looking coyote I'd ever seen just trotted across our path, staring at us unusual. Like it was unusually large, especially for the season, and its pelt was a darker gray than most around. I don't know if that's what the smell was, but it was just weird. When it looked at me, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I got a really bad feeling. Its eyes were almost human, and we got back to the ranch after 4 hours of constant walking, just trying to get away from the forest as fast as possible. When we arrived, all the horses broke out in a dead bolt from the end of the pasture near the woods to the opposite side. Needless to say, we untacked very quickly and drove off. I don't know what we encountered, but whatever it was, it did not want us there. This happened to me in January of 2019 in western North Carolina, around the small town of Silva. I was participating in a long-week program to get certified as a first responder for wilderness first aid and rescue. I am studying to become a forester, and it is important to know how to keep people alive in the woods when things go wrong. There are 2 primary locations in the complex: a classroom with some bathrooms and a kitchen, where we spent most of the day in class and ate meals, and a group of one-room cabins on top of a steep hill directly north of the classroom where we would sleep. An important thing to note about the cabins is the heating system. Each cabin has a small but powerful radiator, and that it makes the cabin feel like a sauna if left on for too long. Since it was January in the Appalachians, it was pretty chilly outside at night, so the heat was needed. In order to strike a balance between boiling in our beds and getting hypothermia, we would turn on the radiator and leave a window open so the warm air and cold air could circulate and create a reasonable temperature. Don't get at me about the waste of power. I didn't like it either. The radiator and the open window were at the front of the cabin, next to the door, and my bed was directly across from the window. The incident happened on the 5th day, a Thursday of my time there. My boyfriend and I, who was enrolled in the program with me, had settled down for the night in the cabin we shared with one other person. We had gone to sleep as normal, and were sleeping soundly on 2 bunks that we had pushed together so we could sleep next to each other. Sometime during the night, I was woken up by some shuffling on the other side of the room near the window. I heard my boyfriend say in a complaining voice, "Can't we close this window?" I wake up feeling frozen. I woke up, sat up in my bed groggily, about to answer him, when I heard another voice say, "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty." I snapped awake and froze where I was sitting. The voice that had responded was my voice. There is something very strange and wrong in hearing your own voice repeated back at you, in the dark. I looked down next to me where I saw my boyfriend sleeping soundly. At this point, a mortal dread had a tight grip on my chest, and I forced myself not to even move or blink. I was focused intently on the place near the window, fearfully anticipating more of my own words. I heard more shuffling outside the window, and my same words were repeated. "If we close the window, it'll get too hot and we'll wake up sweaty," followed quickly by my boyfriend's voice again. "Can't we close this window?" I wake up feeling frozen. Towards the end of the last repetition of my boyfriend's words, there seemed to be an unevenness in the enunciation, like raising and lowering the pitch slightly. I remained frozen in my bed, feeling my hand fall asleep in my propped up position. I sat there for what felt like 15 or 20 minutes, listening to whatever it was shuffle around in front of our window, separated from me by an odd 10 feet and a window mesh. Eventually, the shuffling became more frequent, and a weird mumbling sound came from outside the window, with no real words being said, or none that I could make out. This particular behavior didn't last long before the shuffling sound moved to the left of the window to the door, where a scratching sound began to manifest. As the sound moved, I saw the silhouette of a medium-height figure that moved in an uncanny way, like when a baby animal tries to walk for the first time, but isn't quite strong enough to stand up correctly. It sounded like somebody was scraping some dry sticks against the wood of a door. Not aggressively, but kind of like an impatient dog asking to be let in. This scratching slowly moved around to the cabin, stopping when it reached the wall that I was closest to. My ears were strained to hear anything that might indicate further action, but all I could hear were footsteps on the dry leaves. The footsteps eventually moved away from the cabin and down the other side of the hill, and didn't return for the rest of the night. I stayed unmoving from my position, at least another half hour before my body readjusted itself slightly, letting blood flow back into my asleep limbs. I was wide awake until my boyfriend's other roommate's alarm went off sometime before dawn to get ready for the day, which felt like maybe 2 hours, but I couldn't be certain because I didn't have a clock. My boyfriend was surprised that I was awake before him, as I typically am a late sleeper. But I just told him his alarm clock woke me up and tried to act somewhat normally. We got up and got ready for our day, but I refused to leave the cabin until the sun began to peek over the mountains. For the rest of the week, I was on edge and felt like there were eyes on me whenever it was relatively dark out, though I'm not sure how much of it was raw paranoia. And the day following the incident at night, I'd realized the lines that were repeated to me by the voice were a part of a conversation that my boyfriend and I had had earlier in the week, and I came to the conclusion that whatever it was that had been outside our cabin heard us talking. This scared me a great deal, as I also realized that it had likely been lurking there in the following nights as well, without realizing it, and might do so again for our remaining nights, though it ended up not coming back. I waited to tell my boyfriend about this until we left the program, because he scares easy, and was already a little wary of walking in the woods at night up in the cabins. It should be noted that I know this is not to be a sleep paralysis experience, as I have had them before, and they were nothing like this.